Wen Yubai was sent into the emergency room lobby just as the heaviest rain since the start of autumn poured down outside. The back doors of the ambulance swung open. The stretcher wheels rolled through standing water, splashing up muddy spray. The paramedic jumped off, rapidly briefing the receiving ER doctor. Male, 29, side impact collision on the driver's side, steering wheel compression to the chest, suspected blunt cardiac contusion. Blood pressure continuously dropping, 1 episode of ventricular fibrillation en route, successfully cardioverted. The ER doctor lifted Wen Yubei's eyelids to check his pupillary light reflex and palpated his carotid pulse. His expression immediately changed.
Cardiac surgery.
Contact the cardiac surgery attending on call.
This patient needs surgery immediately.
A nurse jogged off to make the call.
The ER lobby was a whirl of people.
Monitor alarms blended with the cries of family members, a cacophony like a pot of boiling kanji. Wen Yubai lay on a mobile bed in the resuscitation area, his consciousness already blurred, a trace of bloody froth at the corner of his mouth. The heart rate curve on the monitor danced chaotically, like a snake gone mad. 30 seconds later, the nurse who made the call ran back, her face showing an expression hard to define between anxiety and embarrassment. The cardiac surgery attending on call, Dr. Zhao, said. Director Song is currently performing a mitral valve repair in OR 3. The patient was signed in by her personally. She can't break away. The ER doctor's hand paused in midair. He looked up at the nurse.
Wen Yubai
Isn't he Director Song's? He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone present understood. Song Wantang's husband was named Wen Yubai. Quite a few people in the hospital knew this. After all, a top cardiac surgeon marrying a pediatrician working at a community clinic was a combination that had long occupied a top spot on the hospital's gossip charts.
Did you make it clear to Director Song?
The ER doctor lowered his voice. Her husband in a car crash, blunt cardiac contusion, possible cardiac tamponade at any moment. Under these circumstances, she's not coming?
The nurse bit her lip.
I told her.
I even reported the patient's name.
Dr. Zhao went in personally to relay the message. When he came out, he told me. Director Song said her current surgery already had the chest open and it was impossible to change surgeons mid-procedure. A silence fell over the ER lobby for a few seconds, the beeping of the monitors suddenly sounding exceptionally piercing. Then have Dr. Zhao start first. The ER doctor made an immediate decision. Push the patient to the OR. I'll notify the medical affairs office simultaneously.
Who's the second on call for cardiac surgery?
Call them in to assist. The second on call is Director Joe, but He's not in the hospital tonight. It'll take at least 40 minutes for him to get here.
40 minutes?
The ER doctor's voice rose half an octave before he forcefully suppressed it. In 40 minutes, it'll be too late. Let Dr.
Zhao take the lead.
Tell him I don't care what method he uses. This patient cannot wait. As Wen Yubai was being pushed into the elevator, the monitor suddenly emitted a long, shrill wail. Ventricular fibrillation. The ER doctor practically lunged forward, hands overlapping on Wen Yubai's chest, starting compressions while shouting, "Defibrillator."
Quickly!
The adhesive pads were slapped onto his chest. Charging. Discharge. Wen Yubei's body jolted violently under the current, then dropped back down. The chaotic fibrillation waveform on the ECG briefly smoothed out for a moment, then resumed its chaos. A second shock, another 120 joules of current passed through his heart. Wen Yubei's fingers curled spasmodically, his consciousness briefly surfaced amidst the searing pain. He heard voices shouting around him, VF twice, blood pressure, unreadable, someone was yelling make way. The overhead lights streaked past one after another, blindingly white. His lips moved, forming an almost inaudible syllable, as if calling someone's name, but no one noticed. Meanwhile, inside OR 3, everything was quiet and orderly. Song Wantang stood at the primary surgeon's position, her hands as steady as if welded in midair. The operating light illuminated the open chest cavity. Through her surgical loops, her gaze fell upon the leaflets of the mitral valve. The needle holder in her hand clamped the suture, passing it through the tissue stitch by stitch, her movements fluid, almost carrying a certain rhythm. Pei Huaizhou lay on the operating table, his face peaceful under anesthesia. His injury was indeed not serious, mild mitral valve prolapse with moderate regurgitation and elective surgery. All preoperative assessments were excellent. It was the type of surgery that could be done earlier or later. He chose to have it tonight because Song Wantang said she was on duty and could operate personally. By the time the circulating nurse came up behind her for the third time, Song Wantang had already sensed something was wrong. Director Song, The circulating nurse's voice was very low, but the anxiety in her tone was impossible to hide. The ER called again. They say, "Your husband's condition isn't good. Blunt cardiac contusion, suspected pericardial effusion. Dr.
Zhao can't handle it alone. They want to ask you to go take a look.
The operating room fell silent for 2 seconds, leaving only the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the faint pneumatic hiss of the anesthesia machine. Song Wantang did not look up. The needle holder in her hand grasped the next suture, accurately passing through the annular tissue. Dr. Zhao is an attending in cardiac surgery. Can't he handle an emergency thoracotomy? Her voice came through the mask, calm as if discussing a surgery that had nothing to do with her.
But there are no buts.
Song Wantang cut her off, her hand movements never stopping for a moment.
I've already opened the chest on this case. The extent of the posterior leaflet prolapse is larger than anticipated. The annuloplasty will need at least 40 more minutes. If I switch surgeons mid-procedure, who will take over? Tell Dr. Zhao to handle it himself and report back if there are developments. The circulating nurse opened her mouth, then closed it, saying nothing more. She turned and left. The door of the OR closed behind her with a muffled thud. Song Wantang continued suturing the valve. 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 3 stitches. Every movement of her fingers was as precise as machinery. No one could see her expression beneath the mask, nor did anyone notice that her fingers gripping the needle holder tightened almost imperceptibly at one moment.
In the other OR, the sweat on Dr.
Zhao's forehead was already dripping onto the sterile drapes. On the cardiac monitor before him, Wen Yubei's heart rate curve was inching downward, like an iron wire being slowly bent, ready to snap completely at any moment. Blood pressure still dropping, 60-40, almost unreadable. The anesthesiologist's voice was trembling, gritting his teeth. Doctor.
Zhao performed a pericardiocentesis.
The moment the needle tip entered the pericardial cavity, dark red blood gushed out, confirming the diagnosis of cardiac tamponade, but after draining the fluid, the blood pressure did not rebound as expected. This meant the myocardial damage was more severe than anticipated. The heart's pump function was irreversibly failing. Prepare for thoracotomy. Notify the blood bank for massive transfusion. Dr. Zhao was practically shouting. Send someone to urge Director Song again. Tell her that her husband's heart is about to stop. The nurse dashed out. A rapid burst of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Inside OR 3, Song Wantang had just placed the final suture of the annuloplasty. She set down the needle holder, flexed her slightly stiff fingers, and prepared to check the valve coaptation. Just then, the intercom in the OR crackled to life. Director Song, it was the circulating nurse's voice, carrying a calmness that was forcefully suppressed, so much so that it felt unnervingly wrong.
Word just came from the emergency, or
Wen Yubei's heart has stopped.
Song Wantang's hand froze in midair. That moment of hesitation lasted less than a second, short enough that perhaps no one noticed but herself. Then she lowered her eyes, picked up the instrument again, and her voice remained steady, almost ruthless. Is Dr. Zhao organizing the resuscitation?
He is.
2 shocks already, no recovery. Tell him to continue. I'm almost finished here. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The other end of the intercom was silent for a few seconds. Finally, a low voice came through. Director Song, it's already been 3 minutes. Song Wantang said nothing. Her hands continued their work, but this time, the assistant standing opposite clearly saw the knuckles of the hand holding the needle holder turn a ghastly white. She kept her head down, looking at no one, completing the final steps with a rhythm bordering on obstinacy, the saline injection test, checking for regurgitation, confirming no leaks in the suture line. Every step was done meticulously, as if she wasn't racing against time for a life, but performing a textbook perfect demonstration surgery. Pei Huai's surgery was, in the end, a perfect result. The mitral valve repair was beautifully done. The coaptation line was smooth and neat. Postoperative ultrasound showed complete resolution of the regurgitation. When Song Wantang peeled off her gloves and walked out of the OR, the clock on the wall pointed to 10:47 p.m. Nearly an hour had passed since she received the first notification. She walked quickly down the hallway toward the emergency OR. Her red high heels struck the terrazzo floor, producing a crisp, hurried sound. She had specifically worn those shoes this morning before leaving the house. Wen Yubei had complimented them at the entryway, saying they looked nice. She was in a rush and had responded casually before walking out. A crowd had gathered outside the emergency OR.
Dr.
Zhao leaned against the wall, his surgical cap removed, his bangs plastered to his forehead with sweat. His face was etched with exhaustion and gravity. Seeing Song Wantang approach, he straightened up. His lips moved, as if to speak, but in the end, he just shook his head. He was saved, he said, his tone devoid of any triumph. Cardiac arrest for 3 minutes. High-dose epinephrine and dopamine.
Pulled him back by brute force.
That's the limit of what ordinary equipment can do. Song Wantang stood at the door of the OR, looking through the glass window at Wen Yubai lying on the bed inside. He was covered head to toe in tubes. The ventilator was connected to the endotracheal tube. A chest drainage bottle hung beside the bed. His complexion was so ashen it almost blended into the bedsheet. She was all too familiar with the numbers on the monitor. Blood pressure barely maintained by medication, irregular heart rate, cardiac output index dangerously low. Even if he was saved, the subsequent recovery of cardiac function would be an uphill battle. Her hand rested on the door handle to the OR. Her fingertips were ice cold. Just then, a flurry of footsteps came from the other end of the corridor. People from the medical affairs office and the hospital administration on duty rushed over together, their faces a mix of anxiety and an indescribable excitement. The director of the hospital office on duty grabbed Song Wantang's arm. Director Song, perfect timing.
We just received word.
Reporters from the city TV station and the provincial newspaper are already downstairs. They want to interview you about performing 2 difficult heart surgeries back-to-back tonight, especially your professional dedication in insisting on completing the first surgery. The City Health Commission leaders personally called to commend Song Wantang stood rooted to the spot, listening as the words flowed past her like water. She turned her head and glanced through the glass one more time at the man inside, covered in tubes. Then she pulled her gaze back and nodded at the hospital office staff. After I finish handling things here, she said. Her voice was steady, her expression unchanged, as if nothing had happened at all.
Doctor.
Zhao felt he had never been this exhausted in his entire life. The operating light above the table stung his eyes. As the electric scalpel in his hand cut through Wen Yubei's sternum, the smell of burnt flesh mixed with the metallic scent of blood seeped through his mask, turning his stomach. It wasn't that he had never done an emergency thoracotomy before. This time was different. The man lying on the table was the husband of their cardiac surgery director, and that director was in the next OR, performing a mitral valve repair that could have been an elective procedure at any other time. Sternal retractor. Dr. Zhao's voice was muffled behind the mask, but his hands didn't dare stop for a moment. The retractor was inserted into the split sternum. He saw the pericardium. That normally smooth membrane was now swollen and purple, like a balloon engorged with blood, dangerously bulging with every faint heartbeat. Cardiac tamponade confirmed. He nodded to the anesthesiologist. Opening the pericardium.
Watch the blood pressure.
The moment the scalpel sliced through the pericardium, dark red blood surged out like a flood held back for too long, splashing his hand.
The negative pressure drainage bottle rapidly filled with nearly 300 milliliters of blood.
The pressure in the pericardial cavity was finally released. Dr. Zhao stared intently at the blood pressure numbers on the monitor, counting in his head 120, 110, 100. Blood pressure was rebounding, but the speed was too slow, so slow it made his heart sink.
Still bleeding.
The assistant leaned over to look. There is a contusion laceration on the anterior wall of the right ventricle, about 2 centimeters, oozing blood with each heartbeat. Suture it.
Doctor. Zhao reached for the pledgeted suture.
As the needle tip passed through the edematous myocardial tissue, the feel of it made his heart sink further. Normal myocardium is elastic. Piercing it gives a firm, resistant sensation. But right now, Wen Yubei's myocardium felt like a waterlogged sponge, soft and mushy. Every stitch felt like it might tear at any moment. As he was placing the 3rd stitch, the monitor's tone changed.
Ventricular fibrillation.
Defibrillate.
20 joules. Dr.
Zhao practically roared.
The internal defibrillation paddles were placed directly on the heart's surface. The current passed through. The myocardium twitched violently. The waveform on the monitor briefly stabilized, then slipped back into chaotic fibrillation. Again. 30 joules. Second shock. Wen Yubei's body jerked on the table. A muffled sound came from his throat, blocked by the endotracheal tube, like a drowning man desperately struggling beneath the water's surface but unable to scream. The waveform on the monitor still did not return to a sinus rhythm. Instead, it became increasingly fine and weak.
1 milligram epinephrine push.
Open cardiac massage.
Dr.
Zhao inserted his hand into Wen Yubei's chest cavity, his 5 fingers wrapping around the wet, slippery heart. He began rhythmic compressions. He had performed open cardiac massage a fair number of times, but the experience of directly holding another person's heart in his palm, feeling it lose strength progressively, sent a chill from his bones outward every single time. Blood pressure undetectable, the anesthesiologist's voice had gone hoarse. Central venous pressure still dropping.
Push another milligram of epinephrine.
Send someone to see when exactly Director Song can get here? The nurse ran out again. The OR door swung open and shut with a bang. Footsteps pounded urgently in the corridor.
Doctor.
Zhao lowered his head and continued compressions. The heart in his hands contracted and dilated passively under his squeezing, pumping blood toward organs increasingly starved of oxygen. His arm began to ache. Sweat from his forehead dripped down his brow and fell onto the sterile drapes, forming small gray damp spots. The nurse who ran out returned in less than 2 minutes. She stood at the door of the OR, hesitating for a moment before speaking. Her voice carried a careful, pained reluctance.
Doctor.
Zhao, Director Song says.
She needs less than 10 minutes to close. She says for you to continue. Doctor.
Zhao's hand paused.
Less than 10 minutes. He looked at the heart in his palm that was gradually losing its tone and suddenly felt how absurd those 3 words were. During CPR, every minute is a gate of hell. The probability of survival plummets with each passing minute. 10 minutes? 10 minutes was long enough for a person to walk from life to death and back several times over. Continue compressions. He forced the words out through gritted teeth, switching hands to keep squeezing the heart.
The clock on the wall ticked second by second.
Each movement of the second hand seemed to step on everyone's nerves. The anesthesiologist reported numbers at intervals, his voice growing lower each time.
Arrest, 2 minutes.
Arrest, 2.5 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That number settled in the OR, heavy as a block of iron. Cardiac arrest for 3 minutes meant the brain had already begun to suffer irreversible hypoxic damage. Even if the person was brought back, whether cognitive function could be restored, the extent of neurological damage, no one could guarantee anything. Doctor. Zhao had seen too many such cases. The heartbeat returned, but the person never woke up.
Or woke up and didn't recognize the ones closest to them.
Damn it!
Doctor!
Zhao suddenly cursed.
The sound wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally jarring in the quiet OR. He took a deep breath and poured all his strength into the compressions, each push as if trying to press his own life force into that heart. The contusion laceration on Wen Yubei's ventricle was still oozing blood. The few stitches placed earlier had barely held the worst spot, but the edematous myocardial tissue was constantly being stretched by the ongoing compressions. New tears were already starting to form around the suture line.
Doctor.
Zhao knew in his heart this was a vicious cycle. The more he compressed, the more damage occurred. The more damage, the worse the cardiac function. The worse the function, the more compression was needed to maintain circulation. He needed cardiopulmonary bypass. He needed a heart-lung machine to take over, to drain Wen Yubei's blood, oxygenate it, and return it, giving that already overburdened heart a temporary rest. But tonight, cardiac surgery only had one perfusionist on duty, and that person was currently inside Song Wantang's OR, assisting with her mitral valve repair.
Contact the perfusionist, Doctor.
Zhao said without looking up. Once Director Song's case finishes, have him bring the machine over immediately. No one responded. The OR was silent for a few seconds. The nurse whispered, "The heart-lung machine the perfusionist is using is the portable one donated by the Windsor Foundation. It's the only portable unit in the whole hospital. Right now, it's in OR 3.
Doctor.
Zhao closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the whites were completely bloodshot. He said nothing more. He silently switched hands, compressed and watched the increasingly weak curve on the monitor, guarding that last line of defense like a stubborn fool refusing to admit defeat. Inside OR 3, Song Wantang was closing the chest. Her movements remained fluid. The sternal wires were passed, twisted, tightened, cut. Subcutaneous tissue and skin were sutured layer by layer. Each stitch was perfectly aligned, the spacing as neat as if measured with a ruler. The circulating nurse stood behind her, lips pressed into a thin line, no longer relaying any messages. Every message that could be passed had been. She simply did not know what else to say. Surgery concluded. Song Wantang removed her surgical loops and pulled the last sterile drape off the patient. The anesthesiologist began the process of waking the patient. She stood beside the operating table for a moment, watching Pei Weizo's face as he gradually resumed spontaneous breathing. Then she turned and walked toward the scrub room. Once the scrub room door closed, it shut out all the noise from the OR. Song Wantang stood before the sink, turned on the faucet, and propped her hands on the edge of the basin, head lowered, watching the running water wash away the disinfectant foam. Her hands still bore the indentations of the gloves. There was a faint red mark at the web of her thumb. She stared at that mark for a few seconds, then abruptly turned off the faucet, yanked 2 paper towels, and pushed open the scrub room door. In the corridor, the hospital office director on duty was still waiting for her, his expression even more excited than before. The reporters from the city TV station had arrived. The red light of the camera was aimed right at the OR exit, waiting to capture the first frame of her walking out. Song Wantang removed her mask, revealing an exhausted but still exquisitely beautiful face. Her eyeliner was perfectly intact. Her lips were a bit pale from wearing the mask for so long, but standing there, her back was ramrod straight, like a spear planted at the OR entrance. Director Song. The reporter raised her microphone and stepped forward. We heard you performed 2 consecutive high-difficulty heart surgeries tonight, especially the first mitral valve repair. Sorry. Song. Wantang raised a hand to stop her. Her voice was not loud, but was clear and forceful.
There is another patient in the ER I need to check on.
We can talk about the interview later.
With those words, she turned and headed in the direction of the emergency OR. Her red high heels clicked on the floor. The heels slipped slightly on a patch of rainwater that hadn't been dried, causing her to stumble half a step. She quickly steadied herself and continued walking. No one noticed the hand holding her phone, her knuckles white. Nor did anyone notice that when she unlocked the screen, the WeChat conversation window showed a line sent by Dr. Zhao 3 minutes ago. VF 3 times, cardiac arrest over 3 minutes. I can barely hold on.
Song Wantang did not reply to that message.
She flipped the phone over, screen facing down, held it in her hand, and pushed open the door to the emergency OR. The moment the door opened, she heard the monitor.
Not an alarm, the steady beep of a sinus rhythm.
Slow. Weak, but it was there.
Dr.
Zhao stood beside the operating table, arms hanging at his sides, gloves soaked in blood. His entire posture was that of a trapped beast whose strength had been completely drained. Seeing Song Wantang walk, he didn't greet her. He simply stepped aside, vacating the spot directly in front of the operating table for her. Song Wantang walked up to the table and looked down at Wen Yubei's face. His eyes were closed. His lashes cast 2 shallow shadows under the operating light. Because of the endotracheal tube, his lips were slightly parted, revealing a sliver of white teeth. There were a few fine scratches on his face, likely from glass shards during the crash, already treated by the ER doctor and covered with a few flesh-colored band-aids. She looked at where those band-aids were placed: left cheekbone, right brow bone, jawline. All spots she would glance at for an extra second each morning before leaving for work.
Wen Yubai was good-looking.
She knew that. From their first meeting, she knew. Later, when she married him, waking up every day to this face felt like she had gotten a bargain. But now, this face was so ashen it was almost unrecognizable. Postoperative diagnosis. She spoke, her voice so steady it felt unfamiliar even to herself.
Dr.
Zhao stood behind her and said word by word: blunt cardiac contusion, cardiac tamponade, contusion laceration of the right ventricular anterior wall. 3 episodes of ventricular fibrillation during surgery. Cardiac arrest for 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Cumulative 12 milligrams of epinephrine. Open cardiac massage for 18 minutes.
Sinus rhythm currently restored.
Blood pressure maintained by dual support of dopamine and norepinephrine. Cardiac output index 1.8.
1.8.
This number caused Song Wantang's pupils to constrict almost imperceptibly. A normal person's cardiac output index ranges between 2.5 and 4. 1.8 meant the amount of blood Wen Yubei's heart was currently pumping was barely enough to sustain the most basic organ perfusion. The slightest disturbance could cause it to stop again.
Where is the perfusionist?
She asked, in OR3 packing up the machine.
Doctor.
Zhao's tone finally betrayed a hint of suppressed resentment. The only portable heart-lung machine was just with you. Song Wantang did not pick up that thread. She reached out, her fingertips lightly resting on the back of Wen Yubei's hand. His hand, bruised and scraped from the impact, had large areas of purplish contusion. The engagement ring on his ring finger was still there. The plain platinum band had been wrapped with a piece of tape by the ER nurse, probably to prevent it from being lost during tests. Her fingertip paused on the ring for a second, then withdrew. Transfer the patient to the ICU. Start intra-aortic balloon pump counterpulsation to maintain coronary perfusion. After the heart-lung machine is available, assess whether ECMO is needed. Her orders were crisp and clean. Her tone was exactly the same as during her usual rounds. Professional, precise, irreproachable. Dr. Zhao looked at her. His lips moved, but in the end he said nothing. He turned and left to write the orders. Song Wantang stood beside the operating table for a while longer. The monitor beeped rhythmically. The anesthesia machine delivered oxygen measured to the milliliter. The numbers on the IV pump ticked up incrementally. Everything was proceeding orderly according to medical routine, like a precisely calibrated machine, every gear meshing seamlessly. Only her phone, flipped face down in her palm, silently glowed with one unanswered message.
When Yubai did not die.
But his body remembered those 3 minutes for him. The intra-aortic balloon pump catheter was inserted through his femoral artery, threaded all the way to the descending aorta, and connected to the machine that weighed over 200 kilograms. The machine synchronized with his heartbeat every second. During systole, the balloon deflated to reduce afterload. During diastole, the balloon inflated, pushing blood back into the coronary arteries. This was the gentlest and most forceful support modern medicine could offer a heart on the verge of failure, like a nanny that never left his side, bearing every pumping action his heart should have done on its own.
Dr. Zhao stayed in the ICU the entire night.
He sat on the hard plastic chair by the bed, eyes glued to the monitor screen, getting up every so often to adjust the balloon pump parameters or tweak the dose of vasoactive drugs on the IV pump. Outside the window, the sky went from pitch black to deep blue, then from deep blue to grayish white. When the first ray of morning light finally crept in, when Yubei's blood pressure had finally stabilized at a level that allowed one to breathe a small sigh of relief.
Doctor?
Zhao stood up and rotated his stiff neck. His lumbar spine emitted a series of cracking sounds. He looked down at Wen Yubei's face, still ashen, but the cyanosis on his lips had receded somewhat, and the color of his nail beds had shifted from bluish-purple back to pale pink. To an ordinary person, these subtle changes might mean nothing, but to a cardiac surgeon, they were the markings on the fine thread between life and death.
Doctor?
Zhao, go get some rest. The ICU head nurse came in carrying a cup of hot water and pressed it into his hands. Well, watch over him here. Call you immediately if anything changes.
Doctor?
Zhao took the cup and had a sip.
The warm water flowing down his throat made him realize he hadn't had a single drop of water since last night. He set the cup on the nightstand and was about to head to the on-call room to lie down. At the door, he turned back and said to the head nurse, "If Director Song comes to see the patient, have her look at the resuscitation records from last night." The complete one. He emphasized the word complete. The head nurse looked at him, said nothing, and simply nodded. Song Wantang walked into the ICU at 9:47 a.m. She had changed into a clean white coat. Her hair was done up again. Her makeup had been touched up. Foundation concealed the dark circles under her eyes. Lipstick applied perfectly. She looked no different from how she did on her usual rounds. Only up close could one catch a faint lingering scent of disinfectant beneath her perfume, a trace from last night's surgery that no amount of fragrance could mask. She walked to Wen Yubai's bedside and picked up the nursing records to read. When she turned to the resuscitation page, her eyes stopped on the line. Cardiac arrest time, 23:08, 14 to 23, 11:21. Total 187 seconds. 187 seconds. 3 minutes and 7 seconds. She read this line 3 times, then turned the page to continue reading the vital signs and medication logs. Her expression showed no change. The head nurse stood nearby, secretly observing her reaction. In her 15 years in the ICU, she had seen countless families crumble upon hearing bad news. Some collapsed to the ground, some hysterically punched the wall, some silently crouched in a corner and trembled. Every reaction felt normal to her. But Song Wantang's reaction, she didn't know how to categorize. This woman read her husband's resuscitation records as if looking at a medical chart that had nothing to do with her. Adjust the counterpulsation parameters. Song Wantang set down the records, her tone flat as she gave instructions. Increase the inflation trigger by 5 milliseconds. The diastolic augmentation effect isn't ideal when his heart rate is on the slower side. The head nurse noted down the orders.
Song.
Wantang stood by the bed for a moment longer, then bent down and tucked the corner of the blanket for him. This was the only gesture she made in the ICU that carried any hint of personal emotion. Then she turned and left. She did not touch his hand. She did not touch his face. She did not even stay by his bedside for an extra minute. Wen Yubai truly woke up the afternoon of the following day. The process of regaining consciousness was like floating up from a deep pool of water. Hearing came first. He heard a beeping sound around him, rhythmic and monotonous. Then came touch. He felt something lodged in his mouth, his throat dry and sore. His chest felt like it was being pressed down by something heavy, making it hard to breathe. Vision came last. It took a tremendous effort to pry his eyelids open a crack. The fluorescent light on the ceiling stung his eyes so much tears streamed out. His field of vision was completely white. Someone noticed his eyes opening and hurried over, shining a penlight at his pupils. He instinctively wanted to pull away, but his neck wouldn't obey. He could only let that strong beam of light move back and forth between his two eyes. Then he heard someone calling his name, asking if he could hear them, telling him to blink. He mustered all his strength and blinked once. The voice's tone noticeably relaxed.
Doctor.
When? You're in the ICU?
The surgery is done. You have a lot of tubes in you right now. Don't move around.
Well, notify Director Song immediately.
Director Song. These 3 words stabbed into the depths of his muddled consciousness like a needle, making his entire body jolt subtly. Fragments of memory began to surface piece by piece: the rainy night, headlights, screeching brakes, the searing pain of the seatbelt digging into his chest at the moment of impact, the jostling in the ambulance, someone shouting, blood pressure dropping in his ear. Then there were some vague voices, very distant, like they were on the other side of a wall, but he vaguely heard his wife's name. And one sentence, he wasn't sure if he really heard it or if it was a hallucination in his semi-conscious state. But he remembered every word of that sentence. Director Song says the chest is already open in her surgery. She can't break away. Wen Yubai closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the darkness for a few minutes. When he opened them again, his gaze was different. He blinked, signaling the nurse that he wanted to write. The nurse slipped a writing board under his hand and pressed a pen between his fingers. His fingers, limp as overcooked noodles from prolonged bed rest, held the pen in a crooked grip, but the words he wrote were still legible.
Did my heart stop?
The nurse hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth. Your heart stopped for a little over 3 minutes during the surgery.
Doctor.
Zhao performed open cardiac massage and brought you back.
He looked at the crooked line of words he had written on the board and was silent for a moment. Then he wrote 3 more words, my wife. The nurse's mouth opened, but for a moment she didn't know what to say. It wasn't that she didn't know about Song Wantang's choice last night.
The entire hospital from last night until now had been privately buzzing with discussion.
Opinions were all over the place. But facing this man who had just been dragged back from the brink of death, she felt she had no standing to say anything on Song Wantang's behalf. Director Song came to see you after her surgery last night, was all she managed in the end. Wen Yubai didn't press further. He put the pen down and turned his head to look out the window. The October sky was a dreary gray. A few withered yellow leaves were swept by the wind and pressed against the glass before spinning away. His eyes reflected that grayness. There was nothing in them, not even anger.
Just emptiness.
It was something far more unsettling than anger. After the nurse left, the ward fell quiet. He raised his hand, the motion nearly drained all his strength, and peeled back the corner of the tape on the back of his hand. The ring was still there. He lowered his head and looked at that plain band for a while, then used his thumb to spin it around, round and round, as if measuring something. On the 3rd day, Wen Yubai was transferred from the ICU to a regular ward. The intra-aortic balloon pump had been removed. The dosage of vasoactive drugs had been weaned down to the lowest maintenance level. His cardiac output index had risen to 2.3, still far from normal, but at least he no longer required ICU-level monitoring. When Dr.
Zhao wrote condition stabilizing on the transfer note, his pen tip paused on the paper.
He thought for a moment and then added, close monitoring needed for cognitive function and neurological sequelae. On the afternoon of his first day in the regular ward, Wen Yubai leaned against the raised head of the bed, sipping the rice soup the nurse brought through a straw. He had lost a significant amount of weight. The hospital gown hung loosely on him. His collarbones and wrist bones protruded sharply, like a chair that had been taken apart and barely put back together, every joint exuding fragility. His phone screen had shattered in the car crash. Doctor.
Zhao had found an old tablet from the department for him to pass the time.
He held the tablet with one hand, his fingers swiping somewhat clumsily across the cracked screen. He was originally just aimlessly browsing the news, but his fingers suddenly stopped. On the front page of the local news app was a face he knew all too well. The photo showed Song Wantang in surgical scrubs, her mask pulled down to her chin, standing at the OR entrance. The operating light behind her was still on. A strand of hair had slipped from her surgical cap and stuck to her temple. The exhaustion on her face perfectly accentuated a kind of resilient beauty. The photo was well taken. So well it looked like a carefully composed magazine cover. Weary but not disheveled, beautiful but not ostentatious. Every detail silently narrated the words benevolent heart of a healer. The headline read, staying at her post in the OR on a night of crashes, female doctor performs 2 consecutive high difficulty, heart surgeries. His finger hovered over the screen for 2 seconds before he tapped on the article. The article was written at length. The reporter began with Song Wantang's resumed the youngest director of a cardiac surgery department at a top-tier hospital in the city at age 32, lead surgeon on hundreds of difficult heart surgeries, author of over a dozen SCI papers, a leading figure in the province's cardiac surgery field. Then, with heavy strokes, it depicted the events of that night. On one hand, a critical patient needing immediate surgery. On the other, her husband sent to the same hospital after a car crash.
Song Wantang suppressed her personal concerns, resolutely chose to stay at the operating table, and used her exquisite medical skill to embody the responsibility and duty of a healer.
He scrolled down and saw the City Health Commission leader's comment, "Comrade Song Wantang's deeds are deeply moving. She is an outstanding representative of medical workers in the new era." Scrolling further down was the Provincial Medical Association's commendation decision. Song Wantang was awarded the title of Most Beautiful Doctor of the Year and recommended for the National Advanced Individual in the health system. Further down, the comment section was filled with praise. "A doctor like this is a true angel in white," saluting the good doctor who stayed at her post. "A doctor's heart is like a parent's heart." Reading this moved me to tears. Wen Yubai placed the tablet on his blanket, picked up the rice soup, and took another sip. The soup was lukewarm, neither too hot nor too cold, just right to drink. The nurse must have tested the temperature. He held the cup in his hand, feeling that faint warmth pass through the cup wall to his palm, then slowly cool. He continued scrolling through the comments. Amidst the rows of praise and emotion, there were occasional voices of a different tune. Wait a minute. The one she saved was her lightly injured first love. The one who almost died was her husband.
You call that staying at her post?
But such comments were quickly drowned out by more praise. Someone replied to that comment, "People with dark hearts see darkness in everything. A doctor saving lives and you find fault?" Wen Yubai looked at that reply. The corner of his mouth twitched, though it was unclear if it was the hint of a smile or something else. He was not angry, at least not outwardly. He simply forwarded the news link to his own WeChat, then opened a fully English back-end system for medical equipment management on the tablet. Dr. Zhao pushed the door open for his rounds and saw exactly the scene. Wen Yubai leaning against the bed, an IV line in his left hand, his right hand slowly operating on the tablet. The interface on the screen was entirely in English, filled with dense data and charts. Dr. Zhao swept a glance at the screen but didn't quite understand it. It just looked very professional, like some kind of advanced medical equipment management system. "Hey, you're looking spirited." Even reading the news, Doctor. Zhao walked over and picked up the medical chart hanging at the foot of the bed, his tone deliberately light. "Blood pressure stable, heart rhythms regular. At this recovery rate, you'll be able to get out of bed in a few days. Once you're discharged, I'll treat you to a good meal to help you recover from the shock." Wen Yubai looked up at him, nodded, and said, "Thank you, Doctor."
Zhao.
These were the first words he had spoken since waking up. His voice was still hoarse from the endotracheal tube irritation, but his tone was calm and gentle, exactly the same as usual.
"Doctor?"
Zhao looked at his unruffled face and felt even worse. He would rather Wen Yubai throw a fit, smash something, curse, even demand to know why Song Wantang didn't save him. Any kind of intense reaction would have been more normal than this calmness. In his many years of clinical practice, he had seen too many patients experience post-traumatic stress after a brush with death. Some cried uncontrollably, some were irritable, some were so depressed they wouldn't speak for days. But Wen Yubei's calmness was not like a stress response. It was more like a cold, deep-seated reckoning, one whose method of settlement he simply couldn't yet fathom.
"You."
Doctor. Zhao hesitated, lowering his voice.
Did you see the news?"
"I did."
Wen Yubai set the tablet aside, his tone as casual as discussing what the cafeteria was serving today. "It was a good photo.
They picked a nice angle for her shot."
Doctor. Zhao was so choked by this sentence he couldn't say a word. His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he sighed, patted Wen Yubai on the shoulder, said nothing more and left. At the door he glanced back. Wen Yubai had already picked up the tablet again, his fingers sliding across the screen at an unhurried pace. His expression was focused and calm, as if handling a task that wasn't particularly urgent but had to be completed.
After Dr.
Zhao left, Wen Yubai operated on the tablet for a few more minutes. His movements were not fast. He had to pause and rest after each swipe, a thin sheen of cold sweat appearing on his forehead. Finally, he exited the system backend and opened his contacts, looking at the only number saved without a name. He looked at it for a long time.
He had never dialed that number.
The Internal Communications Authority of the Windsor Foundation was the last card his grandfather had left him. After graduating from medical school, he chose to work as a pediatrician at a community clinic, married Song Wantang, lived in that small 90-square-meter apartment, and lived an ordinary life of paying the monthly mortgage and browsing the supermarket on weekends. He had never tapped into any of the foundation's resources. Song Wantang didn't know about it. No one around him knew. In their eyes, Wen Yubai was just a pediatrician from a modest background with a gentle personality, whose salary wasn't a fraction of his wife's, and whose role at home was to cook and wait for his wife to come home. He had worn that label for many years, and had never thought about taking it off. Even before yesterday, he hadn't thought about it. But now it was different. He put the tablet down and turned his head to look out the window. Below was the hospital parking lot. His gaze moved past the rows of cars and settled on the building where OR3 was located. On the outer wall of that building hung a large promotional sign, printed with the 4 gilded words, "Benevolent Heart, Excellent Skill." Next to it were the photos of the hospital's latest batch of commended doctors. Song Wantang's photo was first in line. She smiled very appropriately. On the lapel of her white coat was a small brooch, one he had given her for her birthday last year. He remembered that brooch cost him most of a month's salary.
When Song Wantang received it, she just casually placed it on the vanity.
The next morning, he saw the box pressed under a pile of skincare products, the packaging not even opened. Later, he still saw her wearing this brooch on her white coat and secretly felt happy for days. A gust of wind blew in, lifting a corner of the ward's curtain. Wen Yubai pulled his gaze back and looked down at the plain band on his ring finger. The ring on a finger that had grown much thinner was already a little loose. A gentle push could slide it to the knuckle. He took off the ring, placed it in his palm, and turned it over, seeing the date engraved on the inside, the date they registered their marriage. His ring had her initials. Hers had his. He put the ring back on, pushing it to the base of his finger. Then he turned on the tablet and, under that unnamed number, composed an extremely brief command. His finger hovered over the send button for a few seconds. A burst of noise came from outside the window. He turned his head and saw a crowd of reporters, carrying cameras and microphones, surge through the hospital gates, heading straight for the building housing, OR3. The lead female reporter was someone he recognized. She was the one who had first interviewed Song Wantang the night before last. Right now, she was speaking into the camera, though he couldn't hear what she was saying through the window. Judging by her excited expression, it was probably more follow-up coverage related to the most beautiful doctor. Wen Yubai watched the crowd disappear into the entrance of the building, then lowered his gaze back to the tablet screen. His finger pressed send. The command was issued. A line of English confirmation appeared on the screen. He glanced at it, turned off the screen, placed the tablet on the nightstand, leaned back against the pillow, and closed his eyes. That command was only 14 words long. After sending that command, Wen Yubai placed the tablet face down on the nightstand, closed his eyes, and began counting in his head. He counted at a steady pace like a seasoned cardiac surgeon counting heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every 60 counts counted as 1 minute. He made a mental tally mark. This habit was developed back in medical school when learning CPR. The instructor said the compression rate should be 100 to 120 per minute, so he began timing by counting in his head. Later in the operating room, whenever an operation required precision down to the second, he would silently count in his mind.
60. First tally mark.
Outside the ward came the rumbling sound of cartwheels rolling over the floor tiles. The call bell at the nurse's station rang once, and then stopped.
Someone in the distance shouted, "Family of bed so-and-so, are you here?"
Everything sounded exactly like any normal afternoon.
Wen Yubai continued counting.
Another 60.
Second tally mark.
The sky outside the window was gradually darkening. October evenings came early. It was just past 4, but the light was already turning gray. Tail lights flickered on one by one in the parking lot. The red glow passed through the window, casting a small moving shadow on the wall of the ward.
When Yubai watched that shadow slowly move, the rhythm of his internal counting undisturbed.
At 3 minutes, he opened his eyes briefly and glanced at the tablet screen on the nightstand. No new messages. He closed his eyes again and continued counting.
4 minutes and 30 seconds.
The red glow on the wall disappeared. That car must have driven away. The nurse came in to take his temperature. She inserted the ear thermometer. A soft beep sounded. 36.8 degrees.
No more fever.
Good.
The nurse noted it in the records, checked the monitor readings to confirm everything was fine, then turned and left.
4 minutes and 50 seconds.
57, 58, 59, 60. Fifth tally mark.
5 minutes exactly.
Wen Yubai opened his eyes. Almost simultaneously, a sharp alarm rang out from the direction of the ICU. Then a second, a third. Like dominoes, the alarms cascaded one after another. In the blink of an eye, every monitor on the entire floor was screaming. People were running in the hallway, the soles of rubber shoes squeaking piercingly against the floor. The phone at the nurse's station began ringing frantically. The monitor in Wen Yubai's ward also changed its tone. Not a cardiac alarm, but every parameter on the screen suddenly dropped to 0, as if someone had cut the data stream with a single slash. Immediately after, the float in the oxygen flow meter slammed to the bottom with a crisp click. He removed the nasal cannula and slowly sat up in bed. The movement pulled at the incision on his chest, causing a layer of cold sweat to instantly bead on his forehead. But he didn't stop. He sat up until he could lean against the head of the bed, then reached out to pick up the tablet on the nightstand.
The screen lit up.
A system-wide English notification appeared at the center of the notification bar. Windsor Foundation Emergency Equipment Management Protocol activated. Controlled devices numbered WS0001 through WS1247, a total of 1,247 medical devices, have entered mandatory shutdown status. System administrator permissions locked. Unlocking requires biometric authentication from the sole heir.
1,247.
Wen Yubai knew exactly what this number meant. Over the past 15 years, the Windsor Foundation's donations and placements of equipment in this hospital covered all core departments: cardiac surgery, ICU, operating rooms, laboratory, medical imaging, cardiopulmonary bypass machines, intra-aortic balloon pumps, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation systems, high-end monitors, anesthesia workstations, automated biochemistry analyzers, even the surgical lights and operating tables in the ORs. These devices constituted the most elite part of the hospital's hardware system, the technical bedrock on which the hospital maintained its top-tier accreditation. And now, all of them had stopped. The level of chaos in the hallway escalated rapidly within 3 minutes. When the head nurse pushed the door open and rushed in, Wen Yubai was leaning against the head of the bed, tablet in hand, his expression as calm as if he were checking the weather forecast.
Doctor?
When did your monitor stop too?
All the equipment in the building is alarming. We don't know if it's a system malfunction or the head nurse's words broke off mid-sentence as her gaze landed on the tablet in Wen Yubei's hand. She saw the all-English system interface. She saw the ring on his ring finger that he had pushed up to the second knuckle with his thumb. And then she saw his eyes. They were eyes completely different from yesterday's. Yesterday, those eyes were empty, so vacant it made one's heart clench. Today, they were no longer empty. Something else had filled them. Something cold and quiet, like an undercurrent in deep water.
Doctor.
When? The head nurse's voice involuntarily lowered. Wen Yubai set the tablet aside, threw back the covers, and placed his feet on the floor. This action was done extremely slowly. Every step felt like a struggle against the pain in his chest. His bare feet rested on the cold floor. The back of his foot still bore the hemostatic tape from the removed central venous catheter.
The legs of his hospital gown hung loosely, empty.
He steadied himself by holding on to the edge of the bed, then looked up and gave the head nurse a very faint smile. "Could you help me get a pair of slippers?" he asked, his tone polite and gentle, exactly the same as the one he used over the past decade as a pediatrician coaxing children. "I want to take a walk outside." The head nurse stood rooted to the spot. In her 15 years in the ICU, she had witnessed countless emergencies, but she had never seen any patient who had just struggled back from the brink of death after 3 minutes of cardiac arrest, use this tone, amidst the chaos of a hospital-wide equipment failure, to ask for a pair of slippers. She looked at Wen Yubai and suddenly felt that something within this seemingly gentle and harmless man was silently shattering, like a mirror cracking from the center, the cracks still spreading, but the mirror itself still hanging steadily, not yet fallen. She found a pair of slippers and placed them by the bed. Wen Yubai said thank you and bent down to put them on. The bending motion caused the incision on his chest to hurt so much that his vision went black. He paused for 2 seconds, waited for the wave of dizziness to pass, then continued slipping on the slippers. The hospital gown was the standard blue and white striped kind. The cotton washed too many times, so the collar was loose and floppy, revealing a small stretch of pale skin above his collarbone. His entire appearance was gaunt and haggard. But when he straightened up, unhurriedly tied the gown's belt, and adjusted the collar, there was something in that motion that clashed with the hospital attire.
not aggression.
It was an unassuming sense of control, like a man finally picking up a tool he had long known how to use but had kept locked away. He pushed open the ward door and stepped into the corridor. The corridor was already in complete chaos. Nurses ran back and forth clutching paper charts. A third of the core network switches for the electronic medical record system had been donated by the Windsor Foundation, and they too were down. Doctors stood at doorways shouting questions. Some tried to reboot equipment. Some yelled into their phones that the IT department wasn't answering. A few patients' family members, frightened by the alarms, had begun to cry. The emergency lights had not fully activated yet. The hallway was half lit, half dark. Every face wore a layer of gray shadow. Wen Yubai, in his slippers, walked forward step by step. His pace was very slow. Every few steps he had to lean against the wall to rest, but his direction was absolutely clear. He was heading toward the operating rooms. The power outage happened in an instant, but true panic took a few minutes to ferment. The first to feel the visceral pain was the ICU. The moment the monitor screens went black in unison, the head nurse's scalp prickled. There were 6 patients in the ICU.
3 were on ventilators.
2 were on intra-aortic balloon pumps, and 1, the most critical, had just been placed on ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, the day before. The instant the monitors went black, the ECMO display went dark simultaneously. The pump head stopped spinning. The tubing that drew blood from the patient's femoral vein, passed it through an oxygenator, and returned it to the body, turned, within mere seconds, into a foreign object lodged in the blood vessels. Hand crank. The ICU attending practically lunged at the ECMO machine, ripping open the emergency panel on its side to find the hand crank interface. He began turning it by hand. The hand crank was the mechanical backup for the ECMO system. It required no electricity, but it demanded continuous human effort, at least 60 revolutions per minute. Below that speed, the blood would coagulate inside the tubing. The attending doctor gritted his teeth and cranked. The veins on his arms bulged. He did not know how long he could keep this up. 5 minutes? 10 minutes! Until backup power kicked, he could not stop, nor did he dare to. The situation with the ventilators was slightly better. Each ventilator was equipped with an uninterruptible power supply, a UPS which could maintain operation for about 15 minutes after the main power failed.
15 minutes.
That didn't sound short.
But for a patient completely dependent on mechanical ventilation, 15 minutes was all the time they had left in the world. Nurses had already begun manually squeezing the resuscitation bags, one after another, taking turns. Their techniques were practiced and swift, but everyone's eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall. The chaos in the regular wards was of a lower magnitude. Fewer critically ill patients had their lives hanging by a thread, but panic spread among patients and families faster than any virus. Someone in the hallway loudly demanded the nurses explain what was happening. Someone pulled out their phone to record a video, threatening to expose the hospital online. An elderly woman, terrified, suffered an angina attack and crouched against the wall, gasping for air, her family so anxious they were crying. Wen Yubai walked through all of this. He walked very slowly. The legs of his hospital gown flapped gently around his ankles. His slippers made soft padding sounds on the corridor floor. Passing by the ICU door, he saw through the glass the doctor inside desperately cranking the hand pump, beads of sweat rolling down his face. He stopped for 1 step, watched for 2 seconds, then continued on his way. No one noticed him. A tall, thin man in a hospital gown was completely inconspicuous in the chaotic corridor. Everyone's attention was riveted on the shutdown equipment and the screaming alarms. He moved through the pandemonium like an unremarkable ghost, startling no one. The elevators had stopped. He turned into the stairwell, gripping the railing, and descended step by step. Normally going down 3 flights of stairs took less than a minute. This time, it took him nearly 5 minutes. Every step down required pausing to catch his breath. The incision on his chest sent a stabbing pain with every deep inhale, like a thin steel wire stretched horizontally inside his ribcage, cutting with each rise and fall. By the time he reached the first floor, he stood behind the stairwell door for a moment, looking out through the small glass window at the scene in the outpatient lobby. The lobby was more chaotic than upstairs. The outpatient registration and billing systems were completely paralyzed. Long lines formed in front of the windows. People banged on the glass, questioning the helpless staff inside. The automated pharmacy dispensing machine had stopped. Pharmacists were frantically retrieving medications manually from the shelves, their efficiency dropping by more than an order of magnitude. The lab's automated hematology line was down. Dozens of blood samples sat in a row on the conveyor belt, like a severed red river.
5 minutes exactly.
The lobby's public address system suddenly emitted a piercing screech. Then the hospital director's voice came through the speakers in every corner. His tone was deliberately calm, but that calmness was as thin as window paper, ready to tear at a poke. Attention all departments. Due to a sudden malfunction in the medical equipment system, all elective surgeries are suspended. Emergency surgeries will use backup equipment. The IT department is doing everything possible to troubleshoot the cause. Everyone please remain calm and follow the emergency protocols in an orderly manner. Listening to the director's Mandarin, so standard it was almost affected, Wen Yubei's mouth twitched. He knew the hospital's emergency protocols all too well. The so-called backup equipment were those old machines that had not yet been replaced by the Windsor Foundation. Most were gathering dust in storage, some for years. Some even had discontinued parts. The emergency protocols were written for inspections by the Health Commission, not for coping with the simultaneous failure of over 1,200 devices. He pushed open the stairwell door and stepped into the first-floor lobby. Just then, he heard a clamor of voices rising from the elevator shaft. People upstairs, on the higher floors, shouting urgently. The sound was sharp and rapid, piercing through the building's atrium, tumbling down the elevator shaft. It was the floor where the operating rooms were. When the surgical light in OR 3 went out, Song Wantang was at a critical step in an aortic valve replacement. Her scalpel had just cut through the aortic wall, exposing the diseased valve, preparing to excise the leaflets. The moment the light went out, the OR was plunged into absolute darkness, not the dimness where faint silhouettes are visible, but a thick, cellar-deep blackness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The motorized sliding door to the OR locked due to the power loss. The entire room became an airtight black box. On the operating table, the patient's chest was wide open. The aorta had already been incised. If the valve replacement and chest closure could not be completed quickly, this person would silently bleed out in the darkness before anyone could do a thing. Don't panic.
Song Wantang's voice rose in the darkness, steady as a honed piece of metal.
Anesthesiologist, manual bag ventilation, maintain oxygenation. Circulating nurse, get the emergency light.
Red box, third compartment in the wall cabinet.
Her orders were fast and precise, each word as if rehearsed. The circulating nurse fumbled her way to the wall cabinet, yanked open the door and groped in the darkness until her fingers found the handle of the emergency light. She twisted it on. A stark white beam cut through the darkness. The emergency light's range was limited, illuminating only the core area of the operating table. The surrounding anesthesia machine, monitors, instrument tables all receded into shadow. The OR looked like a lone island floating on a black sea. Under the emergency light, Song Wantang continued operating. Her hands were shockingly steady. In the unsteady light, the tip of her needle holder still landed precisely on the intended spots. 1 stitch, 2 stitches, excising the diseased leaflets, preparing to measure the annular size. But then came the problem. Measuring the valve size required a transesophageal echocardiography probe for precise localization. That ultrasound machine was the latest model donated by the Windsor Foundation just last year. Its screen was pitch black now. The backup power only sustained lighting and the most basic life support equipment. High-end imaging devices like the T-probe were not covered by the backup power. Ultrasound is down, the anesthesiologist reported. Then measure manually with the valve sizer. Song Wantang did not look up. The valve sizer was a set of metal gauges. They required no electricity, but their measurement precision was far inferior to ultrasound. In valve surgery, the tolerance for size error was extremely small. 1 size off could lead to a postoperative paravalvular leak or prosthesis patient mismatch. Using a sizer blindly was essentially leaving the patient's long-term prognosis to chance.
Song Wantang knew this risk.
The corners of her mouth tightened into a straight line. She held the sizer between her fingers, reaching into the aortic root, relying on tactile sensation to judge the annular diameter. The emergency light couldn't penetrate that deep. She was operating almost entirely on experience and intuition. Every tactile detail under her fingers was magnified to the extreme.
Size 23, she called out a number.
The nurse passed the corresponding prosthetic valve from the instrument table.
Song Wantang took the valve and began suturing.
Just then, screams came from outside the OR. Not patients' screams. It was the medical staff. The sound traveled down the corridor, mixed with hurried footsteps and the clatter of metal instruments hitting the floor. Then came the sound of shattering glass, probably someone panicking and knocking over an instrument cart in the hallway. What's going on outside? The circulating nurse couldn't help asking. No one answered her. Song Wantang continued suturing her valve. The trajectory of the sutures, illuminated by the emergency light, displayed in almost obsessive neatness. She placed 12 stitches. The spacing of each stitch was precise to the millimeter. Under poor lighting and incomplete tools, her hands remained as steady as a programmed, precision robotic arm. But only she knew that her back was already soaked with cold sweat. Not because of the surgical difficulty. It was because she had just heard someone shout something from the corridor. That sentence pierced through the thick soundproof door of the OR and reached her ears, muffled. Windsor Foundation. All hospital equipment. The air is right here in the hospital. These fragments squeezed through the door crack like shards, striking her eardrums. Her fingers tightened involuntarily at that moment. The needle tip deviated by a fraction of a millimeter before she pulled it back, continuing its precise passage through the tissue. She didn't know what those words meant, but her brain had already started involuntarily piecing the fragments together. Windsor Foundation, all hospital equipment, the air. The Windsor Foundation's equipment covered nearly all of this hospital's high-end medical hardware. She knew this better than anyone because the heart-lung machine on her operating table, the surgical light overhead that had just gone dark, the dead monitor beside the anesthesiologist's hand, all were Windsor Foundation products. The Windsor Foundation was the hospital's largest equipment donor, but its actual controller had never appeared publicly. All donation agreements were handled through lawyers and agents, as mysterious as an urban legend. The air is right here in the hospital? A thought flashed through her mind, fast as lightning. She didn't even have time to grasp its shape before it vanished. She had no time to think deeply. The patient's aorta was still open. The suturing of the prosthetic valve was only halfway done. She took a deep breath and forced all her attention back onto the operating table. The final stitch placed. Knot tied. Suture cut.
The valve was secured.
She began suturing the aortic incision, moving even faster than before. She knew the emergency light's battery wouldn't last long. That model could hold for 40 minutes at most, and nearly half an hour had already passed since the blackout. The aortic incision was closed. She looked up at the anesthesiologist. Prepare to restart the heart. The anesthesiologist adjusted the heart-lung machine parameters. Warm blood perfused back into the coronary arteries. The heart quivered under the electrical stimulus, then resumed spontaneous beating. The monitors were dark, but the anesthesiologist palpated a pulse and listened with a stethoscope, confirming the heartbeat's presence. Heartbeat restored.
Regular rhythm.
Close the chest. After saying these words, Song Wantang placed her instruments on the tray, peeled off her gloves, and turned toward the OR's sliding door. The emergency power had automatically switched to the door's backup circuit. She pressed the manual override. The door slowly slid open. The corridor was now fully lit by emergency lights. The stark white illumination made the entire surgical area look like a morgue. The corridor was packed with people. Doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists, cleaning staff.
Everyone's face wore an identical expression.
It was not fear. It was a kind of bewilderment after having one's entire understanding of the world overturned. They had worked here for years, over a decade. Never had they imagined that these devices they took for granted would one day fall silent all at once. Song Wantang stepped out of the OR. Her red high heels struck the floor, producing crisp clicking sounds. That sound was exceptionally jarring in the emergency-lit corridor, like the sudden click of high heels in a silent, chilling funeral parlor. As she walked, her eyes swept around, searching the crowd for something. Even she wasn't entirely sure who she was looking for. And then she saw him. At the far end of the corridor, on the edge of the emergency light's glow, stood a man in a blue and white striped hospital gown. He was painfully thin, his collarbones protruded from the loose collar. The back of his left hand was still taped with the dressing from an IV line. He stood right on the boundary line between half light and half shadow, part of his face illuminated, the other part hidden in darkness. His entire figure was like a blade half drawn from its sheath. It was Wen Yu-bai. Song Wantang stopped. The sound of her heels ceased abruptly. The corridor suddenly fell silent, as if frozen solid. They looked at each other across a distance of a dozen meters. The surrounding crowd and noise seemed to have been muted. The stark white light of the emergency lamps stretched an empty band of light between the two of them. Wen Yu-bai, in his slippers, walked toward her step by step. His pace was very slow, carrying the particular weakness and effort of a patient on his third day post-surgery. But each step was planted firmly, without a trace of hesitation on the floor. He walked up to her and stopped. Song Wantang was almost a head shorter than him. She had to tilt her chin up slightly to see his expression clearly. She looked at him. Her lips moved, as if she wanted to say something, probably to ask how he was here, or why all his tubes were gone, or why his complexion was so poor. But none of those words left her mouth. because Wen Yubai spoke first. Is the surgery finished? He asked. His voice was gentle, his tone concerned, like a considerate husband asking his wife who had worked late. Song Wantang froze. She had imagined countless ways he might react upon waking: anger, questioning, cold silence, even a huge fight. She had prepared for all of them, rehearsing responses in her mind, but she had not imagined this one. His reaction fell into none of her preset scenarios. It was like a chess game where she had calculated all of her opponent's possible moves, only for the opponent to flip the board on the very first move. It's finished, she heard her own voice answer, dryly. Good.
Wen Yubai nodded.
Then he raised his right hand. Under Song Wantang's gaze, he extended his thumb and forefinger, pinched the plain engagement ring on his left ring finger, and slowly removed it. The ring was very loose on his thin finger, sliding past the knuckle with almost no resistance, landing in his open palm. He held the ring in his palm, glanced down at it, and then, with a slowness that was almost cruel, raised it to eye level. Right in front of her, he turned his hand over. The ring fell to the corridor floor, bounced once, then rolled twice on the tiles, coming to a stop less than 10 centimeters from the tip of Song Wantang's red high heel, reflecting the stark white light of the emergency lamp. The sound of the ring hitting the floor was very soft. The metal band struck the terrazzo floor with a tiny, crisp clink, bounced once under the stark white emergency lights, then rolled twice before coming to a stop right in front of the tip of Song Wantang's red high heels. She did not look down. Her gaze was nailed to Wen Yubei's face, as if she wanted to find some kind of crack in the face of this man she had known for 7 years, been married to for 3, a tremor of anger, a suppressed grievance, or even just a micro-expression of a clenched jaw. Any evidence that could allow her to interpret this scene before her as a loss of emotional control. As long as he lost control, she was confident she could pull the situation back onto a track she was familiar with. She was good at handling out-of-control situations. Every massive hemorrhage on the operating table, every sudden blood pressure drop, she had overcome them all with this command. But Wen Yubai had not lost control. His gaze was very calm, so calm it was unsettling. It was not the look of someone venting fury after being hurt. It was the look of someone who had completed something he had thought about for a long time, weighed repeatedly, and finally made the resolution to do. His heart was completely at peace. He didn't even spare an extra glance at the ring, as if that small metal band flashing coldly on the floor no longer had anything to do with him.
Wen Yubai.
Song Wantang spoke, her voice suppressed very low, so low only the two of them could hear. Do you know what you're doing?
I do.
Wen Yubei's tone was as if he was answering the most ordinary of questions. Gentle, patient, even carrying a hint of that special softness he used as a pediatrician when talking to children. Taking off the ring. The corner of Song Wantang's eye twitched. Behind her, the crowd in the corridor was growing. Several anesthesiologists and nurses who had come out of neighboring ORs stood at a distance, not daring to approach, yet unable to resist staring. Some recognized Wen Yubai, Director Song's husband who worked at a community clinic, a regular fixture on the hospital's gossip charts, standing right in the middle of the hallway in his hospital gown, thin as a utility pole that could be blown over by the wind at any moment. But the aura emanating from him made anyone who thought of stepping forward to mediate unconsciously retract their steps. You waited 3 days, Song Wantang said, her voice still low and restrained, just to do this in front of so many people?
No.
Wen Yubai shook his head, the movement very light, as if afraid of pulling the incision on his chest. I could have taken it off in the ward, but I thought about it and decided to come here to do it. He paused, his gaze passing over Song Wantang's shoulder to look at the OR door behind her, or 3, the very room where she had performed pay-wise use mitral valve repair 3 days ago. After all, you made your choice inside this operating room. It's only fair that I make my choice here.
Fair?
Song Wantang could no longer suppress the sharp edge in her voice.
You call this fair?
Do you have any idea what kind of chaos happened in this entire building in the last few minutes? The ECMO in the ICU shut down. Ventilators are all running on manual bagging. Do you have any idea I know?
Wen Yubai cut her off.
His tone was still gentle, but the point at which he cut her off was as precise as a scalpel.
1 ECMO in the ICU.
15 ventilators. 3 intra-aortic balloon pumps in cardiac surgery. 5 running heart-lung machines in the ORs. The automated biochemistry line in the lab. The automated dispensing system in the pharmacy. The CT and MRI in imaging.
1,247 devices?
All stopped. He recited these numbers unhurriedly, as if reciting a list he knew by heart. With every number he reported, The faces of the medical staff behind Song Wantang grew paler.
They understood.
This was not a system malfunction. This was not an accidental power outage. This was a man-made targeted elimination, so precise it was chilling.
How do you know these numbers?
Song Wantang's voice finally betrayed a tremble she could not suppress. Wen Yubai did not answer that question. He pulled the tablet with the shattered screen from the pocket of his hospital gown, lit up the screen, and turned it to face her. On the screen was an all-English system management backend. In the center was a red authorization confirmation message. Below it was a line of bold black text. Equipment shutdown, protocol executed. Unlock permission holder, Wen Yubai, sole global heir of the Windsor Medical Foundation. Song Wantang looked at that line of text. Her pupils constricted sharply. Her lips parted slightly, as if to say impossible, but the word didn't come out. Because she was a smart person. Incredibly smart. The kind of woman smart enough to become the director of cardiac surgery at a top-tier hospital at 32 did not need others to connect the dots for her.
Windsor Foundation.
All hospital equipment.
The heir is right here in the hospital. Wen Yubai.
When?
It took her only 3 seconds to piece these fragments together. 3 seconds later, her expression changed. It was an expression that had never appeared on her face on the operating table.
Not fear, not anger.
It was the blankness of having one's entire perception utterly overturned. She looked at this man before her, the one who had worn old clothes for 7 years, drove a second-hand Honda, and waited for his monthly paycheck to pay the mortgage, and suddenly felt she had never truly known him.
You.
Her voice was hoarse. You are the Windsor.
Wen Changgang was my grandfather.
Wen Yubai put the tablet back into his pocket, his movements very slow. Every gesture carried the weakness and strain of a post-surgical patient. My mother was his only daughter. I am my mother's only son. The foundation's ownership structure is a family trust. I am the sole trust beneficiary. His tone was flat, as he said this like reading out an inconsequential file. There was no boasting, no resentment. He was simply stating facts. The corridor was as silent as an ice cellar. No one dared to breathe loudly. Only the hum of the emergency lights current buzzed overhead. So what are you going to do now? Song Wantang's chin lifted slightly. That posture was very familiar to Wen Yubai. It was the same posture she adopted on the operating table when encountering unexpected situations. Chin up, back straight, using every ounce of willpower to maintain a surface calm. Use your foundation privileges to retaliate against me. Let the entire hospital know that your wife chose a patient over you, that you can't swallow this insult. So you're going to destroy her career? You've got 3 things wrong. Wen Yubai extended one finger. The movement was slow because his hand was still trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from post-surgical weakness. First, Pei Wei Zhou is not a patient. Has your first love from your university days. Mild mitral valve prolapse. An elective surgery. All preoperative assessments were excellent. You knew perfectly well in your heart that this surgery could have waited until the next day. He extended a second finger. Second, you did not choose a patient over me.
You chose Pei Huai Zhou over me.
Don't equivocate, Director Song.
Your logic shouldn't be this poor. When the third finger extended, his movement paused for a beat. He looked at his own finger. The faint white mark on his ring finger left by years of wearing the ring was still there, looking exceptionally stark under the emergency lights. Third, his voice finally carried a trace of very subtle fluctuation, like a crack opening somewhere in deep water. I have no intention of destroying your career. I just don't want to be the person who waits at home for you to come back anymore. After saying this, he bent down and picked up the ring from the floor. The motion of bending over was extremely taxing on his post-operative body. He had to brace himself against the wall to maintain balance. A searing pain shot through his chest incision at the bending motion, and a layer of cold sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. But he still picked up the ring, wiped the dust off it with his thumb, straightened up, and placed it on the counter of the nearby nurse's station.
Yours is still on your hand.
I'm leaving mine here. He straightened his back and looked into Song Wantang's eyes. I'll have my lawyer draft the divorce agreement and send it to you. Don't worry, I won't make things difficult for you in the agreement. The apartment is yours.
The savings are yours.
Every penny you've saved over these years is yours. I don't want anything. Song Wantang's lips were trembling. On her face, adorned with delicate makeup, a crack finally appeared. Not tears, but a tremor deeper than tears, churning outward from the inside. She opened her mouth, but Wen Yubai had already turned around and, in those ill-fitting slippers, was walking back down the corridor step by step.
Wen Yubai.
Her voice suddenly spiked, sharp enough to feel unfamiliar even to herself. He paused but did not turn around.
Your grandfather is Wen Changgang, she said through gritted teeth.
Why did you pretend for 7 years?
Wen Yubai stood there, his back to her, silent for a long time.
The emergency light at the end of the corridor stretched his shadow very long on the terrazzo floor, thin as a thread that could be snapped by the wind at any moment. Then he tilted his head slightly. The profile of his face was sharply defined under the emergency light. The corner of his mouth curved just a little, an arc that was hard to tell was a bitter smile or relief. "Because I didn't want you to fall in love with the heir of the Windsor Foundation," he said. "I wanted you to fall in love with Wen Yubai." He paused for a second. "Unfortunately, you didn't love either one."
The footsteps resumed.
The soft padding of slippers down the corridor gradually faded into the distance, blending into the still ongoing clamor from the floors below, impossible to distinguish anymore. The people in the corridor seemed frozen in place for a full 10 seconds after Wen Yubai left. No one spoke.
No one moved.
No one even dared to look at Song Wantang's face. Everyone kept their heads down, pretending to be busy arranging instruments, flipping through charts, checking the emergency light's battery levels, using any unnecessary little motions to mask the same shared awkwardness. They had just eavesdropped on the public execution of a marriage. Every word, every detail of that execution would, for a very long time to come, become the hottest topic of gossip in the hospital cafeteria. Song Wantang stood rooted to the spot, her back ramrod straight. Her right hand unconsciously moved to touch the ring finger of her left hand. The ring was still there, the matching pair to the one on the floor, engraved on the inside with Wen Yubei's initials. She had worn it for 3 years and never taken it off. The moment her fingertip touched the ring, it was as if she had been burned. Her hand jerked away.
She did not go after Wen Yubai.
She turned around and walked back into OR3. Inside the OR, the anesthesiologist and assistant were closing the chest of the patient who had just undergone the aortic valve replacement. The emergency light's battery was almost depleted. The light flickered on and off, like a heart struggling to beat. Song Wantang walked to the operating table and looked down. The sternal wires were twisted tight. The final layer of skin was being sutured. The patient's vital signs were stable. Her work was done, but she stood there, for the first time after a surgery's conclusion, not knowing where to go. Normally, she would go to the scrub room to wash her hands, touch up her makeup, pull out her phone to check for missed messages, and then sign her name on the surgical record. But today, that routine suddenly lost all meaning, an empty shell stripped of its core, hanging there uselessly. Director Song, the circulating nurse, cautiously spoke. "The chest closure is almost complete."
"Would you like to go out and rest first?"
Song Wantang nodded, but she did not move. She stood at the foot of the operating table, looking past the sterile drapes at the patient's face, a 62-year-old male with aortic stenosis and regurgitation. The surgery was very successful. His postoperative quality of life should improve significantly. She had saved another person. In 3 days, she had saved 2 people, Pei Weizhou and this aortic valve patient. Her hands had patched up 2 hearts on the verge of failure within 72 hours. This was a record any cardiac surgeon could be proud of. But when she looked down at her own palms, what she saw was not the achievement. She saw the white mark left by the ring on Wen Yubei's ring finger. She clenched her fists abruptly. Her nails dug into her palms, the pain making her draw a sharp breath. Suddenly, a burst of orderly and rapid footsteps came from outside the corridor.
Not the hurried kind born of panic, but the trained, purposeful kind.
Immediately after, the hospital's deputy director on duty, along with the medical affairs director, the security director, and a group of administrative staff, surged over from the end of the corridor, like a dark tide. The deputy director was a balding man in his 50s, whose greatest skill was usually smoothing things over. But now, his face was as stern as a sheet of iron, his forehead glistening with oily sweat. "Director Song," he stopped in front of her, panting, and lowered his voice. "The patient who was just talking to you in the hallway. That's your husband Wen Yubai, correct?"
"Yes."
Song Wantang's voice had regained its steadiness, like a recalibrated instrument. "And he just admitted in front of you that he is the heir to the Windsor Foundation?" "Yes." The deputy director closed his eyes and rubbed his temple forcefully. When he opened them again, his eyes were bloodshot and filled with an emotion Song Wantang had never seen on his face before, not anger, but fear.
"Director Song, this is far more serious than any of us thought."
He pulled a document from his briefcase and handed it to her. "Just now, the Windsor Foundation's legal department sent the hospital a formal letter. This is just the electronic version. The hard copy is already on its way."
Song Wantang took the document and quickly scanned it.
Her reading speed was very fast. Years of research training allowed her to read and grasp the core arguments of an English paper within minutes. But she read this document 3 times before she was sure she hadn't misread it. The letter's content was very concise, to the effect of, given that Mr.
When you buy, the sole heir of the Windsor Foundation, experienced serious medical misconduct during his treatment at your hospital, the foundation is initiating a comprehensive audit process effective immediately.
The audit scope includes the whereabouts, usage records, and maintenance status of all 1,247 pieces of equipment donated or placed by the foundation in the hospital over the past 15 years. Until the audit is complete, unlocking permissions for all devices will not be granted. Furthermore, the foundation will reassess the long-term cooperative relationship with the hospital, including the donation project for the new cardiovascular and cerebrovascular center, currently under negotiation and valued at 230 million yuan. The signature was from the Windsor Foundation Legal Department. The official seal was already stamped. 230 million. When the deputy director read this number aloud, his voice was shaking. Director Song, the cardiovascular center is a key municipal project. The NDRC approval has already been issued. The land has been allocated. Everything is waiting for this donation to come through to break ground. If this project falls through, I can't answer to the city leaders.
Song Wantang handed the document back to the deputy director.
Her face was expressionless.
You're telling me this. What do you want me to do?
The deputy director opened his mouth, hesitated, then gritted his teeth and said in a fawning, cautious tone that even he felt ashamed of, "Could you talk to your husband? This is, after all, a domestic matter between you two. There is no need to blow it up to this extent, right? If the equipment isn't unlocked for even one day, the ICU can't function normally for a day. Today was already the limit. If this continues tomorrow, there will be deaths." Song Wantang looked at him and suddenly felt how absurd it all was. This deputy director had always been famous in the hospital for never offending anyone. Even if a department director argued with him, he would just laugh it off and mediate. Yet now he was standing before her, begging her to plead with the man he couldn't even name at the year-end banquet, Director Song's family member. All of them, including herself, had treated Wen Yubai as an insignificant accessory for too long. So long that they forgot to ask one question. Was that accessory willing? "He's no longer my husband." Song Wantang heard herself say this sentence. Her voice was cold, like reading out a medical document that had nothing to do with her. "At least soon he won't be. If you have business with him, you can go directly to his ward." The deputy director was stunned, clearly not expecting this answer. He was about to say something more, but Song Wantang had already walked past him. The sound of her high heels on the floor was rapid and crisp, disappearing all the way to the stairwell at the end of the corridor. She did not go to Wen Yubai's ward. She went to the rooftop. The hospital rooftop was empty. The late October evening wind was already very cold, blowing against the face like a handful of fine needles. Song Wantang stood by the railing, took out a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from her white coat pocket. This was a secret she had kept for years. Wen Yubai didn't know. No one in the hospital knew. A cardiac surgeon shouldn't smoke. She knew better than anyone the damage mechanism of smoking on vascular endothelium. But she still lit one, took a deep drag, letting the smoke swirl in her lungs before slowly exhaling it. The sensation of nicotine rushing into her bloodstream stopped her fingers from trembling. She looked down at the scattered headlights of cars in the parking lot below. Her mind replayed Wen Yubai's sentence over and over. "I wanted you to fall in love with Wen Yubai."
Unfortunately, you didn't love either one.
She wanted to retort. She wanted to tell him, "Who are you to judge for me? How do you know whether I loved or not?" But she found she couldn't open her mouth. Even just practicing in her imagination, facing the empty air, she couldn't. Because she was an honest person, at least when it came to self-scrutiny. She was always merciless. She knew all too well that what she loved was never Wen Yubai himself. What she loved was a certain function he provided. Stable emotions, obedient waiting, the considerateness of never calling to pester her when she was busy. She had called this love, using Wen Yubai as a perfect backdrop to highlight her dazzling career. Now, the backdrop had moved on its own. Not only had it moved, it had unplugged the power to her entire stage. The cigarette burned down to the end, briefly scorching her finger. She dropped the butt on the ground, crushed it with her high heel, and then descended from the rooftop. As she walked downstairs, her phone vibrated. It was a new message from a number she hadn't contacted in a long time. Pei Huizhou. "I heard something happened at the hospital.
Are you okay?
I just got discharged. Do you need me to come over?"
Song Wantang looked at this message.
Her thumb hovered over the screen for a few seconds. Then she typed 3 words. "Not necessary." After sending it, she deleted the conversation with Pei Huizhou. Then, after a moment's thought, she blocked his number from her contacts. After completing this action, she paused. She wasn't sure why she did it. Was it because she finally realized Pei Huai's surgery could have waited, or because she needed to find someone other than herself to blame for all of this? She had no answer. She just suddenly didn't want to hear that name ever again. 3 days later, the hospital's investigation report was released. The report was jointly compiled by the Medical Affairs Department and the expert panel assigned by the Health Commission. The investigation process could not be described as anything but meticulous. The expert panel retrieved all surveillance footage from the night of the crash, all surgical records, nursing records, communication logs, and access card swipe data. They cross-checked the timelines point by point. They interviewed 14 relevant medical personnel. They even pulled out the ER triage record from Pei Huai's admission. The final investigation report was 46 pages long, meticulously worded and ironclad in evidence, leaving no room for any appeal. There were 3 investigation conclusions. First, Song Wantang, fully aware that her husband Wen Yubai had sustained blunt cardiac contusion from a car crash, faced a risk of cardiac tamponade, and that the cardiac surgery attending on duty at the hospital lacked the capability to independently complete an emergency thoracotomy, did not terminate a non-emergency, elective mitral valve repair surgery. This resulted in Wen Yubai suffering a 3-minute cardiac arrest during his surgery. This constituted a violation of emergency medical priority assessment principles. Second, the mitral valve repair surgery Song Wantang performed on Pei Huizhou had a preoperative assessment indicating his condition was stable and fully met the criteria for an elective procedure. There was no surgical indication requiring it to be performed that night. That surgery occupied the hospital's only portable cardiopulmonary bypass machine, directly causing the loss of the optimal window for extracorporeal circulatory support for Wen Yubai during his emergency surgery. This constituted inappropriate allocation of medical resources. Third, as the director of cardiac surgery, Song Wantang failed to fulfill her departmental management responsibilities during the emergency incident by not reasonably deploying human resources to address the emergency needs. She bears responsibility for management negligence. Recommended disciplinary action: suspend all clinical surgical privileges for Song Wantang. Remove her from the position of cardiac surgery director. Mandate a 3-month professional ethics re-education program designated by the Health Commission. Clinical privileges may only be reapplied for after completing the program and passing an assessment. Additionally, a further review of the admission process for Pei Huizhou's surgery was recommended. When Song Wantang received this investigation report, she was sitting in the hospital director's office. Besides the director and the deputy director, there were also 2 staff members from the Health Commission, a man and a woman, both with strictly businesslike expressions. After reading the report, she placed it on the desk and said one sentence, "I accept." Her tone was steady. No excuses. No pleas for leniency. Not even any unnecessary emotion. The director and deputy director exchanged a glance. Their eyes were a mix of surprise and an indescribable regret. Song Wantang was a star doctor they had personally groomed and promoted, the hospital's living billboard, the trump card they flaunted at every city health work conference. If possible, they would be more reluctant than anyone to move against her. But the Windsor Foundation's legal letter was already on the Health Commission's desk. The expert panel had already intervened. Unfavorable murmurs were beginning to sprout online. People were posting on forums questioning whether there was more to the story of the most beautiful doctor. At this stage, no one dared to protect her and no one could. Director Song. The hospital director sighed, his voice weary as if he had aged 10 years. "You're the most gifted cardiac surgeon I have ever met. This whole affair, it's such a pity." Song Wantang stood up. She pulled out her employee badge and/or access card from her white coat pocket and placed them on the desk. She glanced down at the badge. The photo showed her in a white coat, smiling with the words Cardiac Surgery Director, Song Wantang printed beneath it. That was a height it had taken her 10 years to reach. Now she was handing it back.
There's one more thing.
The female staff member from the Health Commission pushed up her glasses. This morning, the Windsor Foundation's legal department sent a draft of the divorce agreement to Director Song's personal email.
This is a private matter.
It's not our place to intervene. But we need to remind Director Song that if the divorce agreement involves the attribution of property gifted by the Foundation, it's recommended to go through formal legal channels to avoid future disputes. Song Wantang's expression finally showed a subtle crack. Not because of the words divorce agreement. She had been mentally prepared for that from the moment Wen Yubai took off the ring. It was because of another piece of information revealed in that sentence. Wen Yubai had done exactly what he said he would. He said his lawyer would draft the divorce agreement and send it to her. 3 days later, the agreement had indeed arrived. As she walked out of the hospital director's office, The sunlight in the corridor was beautiful. The October sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a large swath of gold on the ground. She looked down at her own shadow, stretched long by the sun, but something was missing from its silhouette. No stethoscope hanging around the neck, no bulge of a surgical cap. Just a solitary woman in plain clothes, standing in the light. She returned to her office to pack her personal belongings. The office wasn't large, but she had decorated it exquisitely. On her desk was a pot of pothos, a gift from Wen Yubai the day she was promoted to director. She remembered that day Wen Yubai stood holding the flower pot at the hospital entrance, waiting for her to get off work. The first thing he said was congratulations. The second thing was, are you working overtime tonight? At the time, she thought the second sentence was superfluous.
Now she realized it was the most accurate prediction he ever made about their marriage.
She placed the pothos into a cardboard box and rummaged through the drawers. In the bottom drawer, she found an old photo album. She opened to the first page. It was a photo from their wedding day. In the picture, Wen Yubai wore a black suit, smiling so wide his eyes crinkled. She stood beside him in a white wedding dress, her smile radiant and confident. She remembered what Wen Yubai said during his wedding speech that day. Marrying Song Wantang is the luckiest thing that ever happened to me in this life. She closed the album and placed it at the very bottom of the cardboard box. On her way downstairs, she passed by Wen Yubai's ward. The door was half open. Standing in the corridor, she saw through the gap that he was sitting on the edge of the bed, changed into a clean hospital gown. He looked much better than he had 3 days ago. Dr. Zhao sat across from him, discussing something on the tablet. Neither noticed her. She heard Wen Yubei's voice float out, steady and gentle, exactly the same as before. After him discharged, I plan to go back to work at the community clinic. I've already scheduled my pediatric clinic slots for next Wednesday. She stood outside the door, listening to these words. Her heart clenched, as if squeezed by an invisible hand. She finally understood what Wen Yubai meant that day when he said, I don't want anything. He truly meant it. He wanted nothing. The identity of the Windsor Foundation heir was merely a card he was forced to reveal. And the first thing he did after revealing it was not to take over the foundation, not to retaliate against the hospital, not to ruin anyone's reputation. It was to go back to his community clinic and continue being an ordinary pediatrician. She had once thought him unambitious. Now she understood that he simply hid his ambitions too deeply. So deep that even she, the one lying next to him, could not see them. Song Wantang did not go. She knew that the world beyond this door no longer had anything to do with her. Holding the cardboard box, she continued toward the elevator. Her high heels clicked on the corridor floor, one step after another, growing fainter. The elevator arrived. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the first floor. Just before the elevator doors closed, her phone vibrated. Holding the box with one arm, she freed a hand to glance at the screen. It was a new email. The sender read Windsor Foundation Legal Department. The subject line read, Letter and related attachments regarding the divorce agreement between you and Mr. Wen Yubai. She stared at that subject line for 3 seconds, then flipped the phone over, screen facing down, and held it in her hand. The elevator began its descent. The floor numbers ticked down one by one, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With a ding, the elevator doors opened. The outpatient lobby was bustling with people coming and going. Sunlight poured down from the massive glass curtain wall, shining on every hurried patient and family member. Song Wantang crossed the lobby with her box, pushed open the glass doors, and stepped out onto the steps in front of the hospital. In the flower bed by the entrance, the autumn begonias were in full bloom, red and white clustered together, brilliantly illuminated by the afternoon sun. She stood on the steps for a moment, taking a deep breath of the outside air, fragrant with osmanthus. Then she hailed a taxi, placed the cardboard box on the back seat, and got in herself. The driver asked where she was going. She gave the name of an apartment complex, the 90-square-meter apartment where she and Wen Yubai had lived for 3 years. The car pulled away. She leaned against the seat, watching the streetscape rush by outside the window. Her right hand unconsciously moved to touch the ring finger of her left hand. The ring was still there. She traced the 3 engraved letters on the inside of the band, her fingertip feeling the texture of those tiny etchings. Then she placed her hand back on her knee and closed her eyes. The car turned a corner, merging into the afternoon's endless stream of traffic. Impossible to tell anymore whose ruins and whose new beginnings it carried.